For most of the world, the word eunuch has become a distant historical term and echo from forgotten courts, dusty chronicles, and dim palace corridors. But in the ancient world, and especially in the great kingdoms along the Nile, eunuchs were not merely background figures. They were instruments of statecraft, guardians of privilege, and living symbols of a system that demanded absolute loyalty. Their existence reveals a darker side of ancient civilization, a practice that reshaped the lives of boys and men, not because of their crimes, but because of their usefulness. In ancient Egypt, where the pharaoh was considered divine and the palace a sacred world of secrecy, eunuchs formed a unique class whose bodies and futures were altered in ways that served the empire's needs. Their story is one of power and suffering, prestige and loss, duty and erasure, told not through myths, but through the quiet realities of the palace that demanded they exist. Life inside the royal children's wing of the Egyptian palace carried a rhythm unlike any other part of the royal household. It was a world built on sunlight, ritual, and expectations, yet beneath the gentle routines a quiet vigilance shaped every moment. At the center of this delicate environment stood the eunuchs. Their presence was constant, steady, and almost invisible, yet they carried responsibilities more profound than most officials ever realized. They were not merely attendants. They were protectors, teachers, mediators, and silent witnesses to the growing minds of future rulers. The palace viewed royal children as symbols of continuity. Each prince held within him the possibility of becoming pharaoh, and each princess carried the potential to form alliances through marriage. Their lives were political from the moment they took their first breath. Because of this, the palace needed guardians who could be trusted without question, individuals who could remain close to the children yet never influence succession through personal ambition. Eunuchs, reshaped early in life, were considered ideal. The palace believed their loyalty was guaranteed, and that their altered bodies made them safe to serve in areas where other men were forbidden. Every morning began before the sun rose over the Nile. Eunuchs moved through the children's wing in near silence, lighting small oil lamps shaped like lotus buds. They checked the temperature of the rooms, arranged garments made of fresh linen, and placed protective amulets blessed by priests beside each child's bed. By the time the children awoke, the eunuchs had already inspected the gardens for snakes, ensured the guards were alert, and reviewed the day's lesson schedule with the tutors. The children saw only the polished calm of their routines, never the careful preparation behind it. Bathing came first. The children stepped into shallow basins filled with warm water infused with lotus petals. Attendants washed them, but eunuchs supervised every detail, ensuring siblings did not argue, preventing servants from becoming careless, and calming any child feeling restless. They guided without speaking loudly. A soft gesture, a lift of the hand, or a gentle nod often sufficed. Their goal was to create an environment where the children felt secure, even though danger existed in forms they could not understand. Lessons followed. Tutors taught hieroglyphics, stories of the gods, mathematics, and music. Eunuchs stood behind the children like shadows, observing their posture, focus, and temperament. A restless prince received a quiet tap on the shoulder. A princess overwhelmed by a difficult task heard a soft whisper of encouragement. Eunuchs rarely spoke, yet their influence shaped the discipline and confidence of the children more effectively than the tutors' stern lectures. But perhaps the eunuch's most delicate duty involved navigating the unseen rivalry within the palace. Mothers, queens, noblewomen, and concubines all hoped their children would rise in status. Although they rarely spoke their ambitions aloud, their actions revealed them. A concubine lingering too long near the classroom, a noblewoman requesting additional privileges for her son, or a queen watching the tutors with critical eyes. Eunuchs detected these tensions instantly. They adjusted routines to prevent conflict, changed schedules to avoid overlapping visits, and guided children in ways that maintained harmony between households. One misstep could shift the fragile peace between royal women, so eunuchs learned to read the palace like a map of potential storms. Afternoons were devoted to play, though play for royal children was rarely carefree. Eunuchs escorted them to the palace gardens, where ponds sparkled, Birds nested in palm trees, and the air smelled of sycamore and incense drifting from nearby shrines. Children chased painted wooden animals, played balancing games, or practiced gentle archery with blunt arrows. Eunuchs followed at a respectful distance, close enough to intervene instantly, far enough to maintain the illusion of freedom. A playful shove between siblings, a hidden stone near a pond's edge, or a visiting noble child with a mischievous streak, all required immediate, discreet correction. Evenings brought rituals and reflection. Eunuchs guided the children through prayers before small shrines dedicated to Bes, Taret, or Hathor, protector gods associated with children. They ensured each child wore the correct amulet for the night, checked windows for drafts, and soothed fears when nightmares came. A eunuch's hand on a child's back, a quiet hum, or a whispered story about a gentle deity often calmed a frightened child faster than any chant from a priest. Despite their closeness to the children, eunuchs understood that affection could never become attachment. A prince might cling to the eunuch he trusted most. A princess might confide secrets about her lessons or fears. But as soon as the children reached a certain age, the palace reassigned them. Boys preparing for priestly or military training left the wing, and girls approaching womanhood moved into their own quarters. The separation was abrupt and painful, though never openly acknowledged. The eunuch bowed, offered respectful parting words, and returned to silence. His heart, however, often carried the loss for years. Even so, their influence endured. A ruler raised by a gentle eunuch often grew more patient. A queen who had once held a eunuch's hand during storms might send gifts in later years. A prince who survived palace tensions, thanks to a eunuch's quiet interventions, might one day offer him a place of honor. The eunuchs were never credited in scrolls or carvings, but the childhoods they shaped echoed through Egypt's history. Politics flowed through the Egyptian royal palace like the Nile itself, steady, powerful, and impossible to avoid. Every room breathed ambition, every whisper carried intention. Even the softest gesture could shape alliances or ignite rivalry. For the eunuchs, who moved through every corridor and served every member of the royal household, politics was not something they participated in, but something they inevitably lived inside. Though they held no titles, claimed no lineage, and inherited no property, they became woven into the palace's shifting currents simply because they were present where others could not be. Unlike nobles and advisors, who entered politics willingly, the eunuchs had no choice. The palace placed them at the intersection of power, between the queen and the concubines, between princes and priests, between the pharaoh and his officials. Their neutrality made them valuable. Their vulnerability made them cautious. Every day presented new risks disguised as routine. A single conversation overheard, a single emotion misread, or a single gesture perceived as favoritism could alter the course of their lives. Political tension pulsed strongest in the women's quarters. There, the queen's authority stood tall, but concubines maneuvered quietly for influence. A queen might observe from a distance, while a favored concubine gained too much attention from the pharaoh. A concubine might watch another son receive more visits than her own. Each glance, each shift of posture, each gift offered to a child carried deeper meaning. Eunuchs, stationed in these rooms as guardians and attendants, became unwilling witnesses to the ambitions of royal women. But witnessing was dangerous. A eunuch could not react to anything he saw. If he acknowledged a concubine's jealousy, he risked appearing aligned with her. If he ignored the queen's subtle anger, he risked her disfavor. Thus, eunuchs perfected the art of emotional invisibility. Their faces remained calm. Their voices stayed neutral. Their eyes, though observant, seldom revealed comprehension. The palace expected them to be present without ever seeming aware. The greatest political storms erupted when succession entered the palace atmosphere. Whenever the pharaoh fell ill or a new child was born, currents shifted immediately. Royal mothers became more protective. Noble factions aligned themselves with the children whose futures seemed brightest. Priests read omens with sharpened scrutiny. And through it all, eunuchs continued their duties, bathing the children, escorting them to lessons, delivering messages, while the palace buzzed with speculation. A eunuch who spent years raising a prince faced an especially delicate balancing act. Showing too much fondness could brand him as biased. Showing too little might cause the child's mother to accuse him of sabotage. Even subtle acts, such as speaking a child's name warmly or adjusting his collar before a ceremony, could be interpreted as favoring one heir over another. The eunuch had to maintain perfect equilibrium, ensuring that no action suggested he supported any potential successor. The pharaoh's private chambers added an entirely different layer of complexity. There, eunuchs overheard discussions that no one else was permitted to hear. Advisors debated taxes, foreign threats, alliances with Nubia or Canaan, and concerns about rival families within Egypt. Sometimes the pharaoh expressed doubts about generals, scribes, or even family members. A raised voice, an argument behind closed doors, a sudden pause in conversation. All of it imprinted itself onto the eunuch's memory. But memory itself was dangerous. The palace allowed eunuchs to hear everything precisely because it believed they would never repeat it. Should anyone suspect a eunuch of sharing political secrets, even unintentionally, his survival would be questioned. Eunuchs, therefore, developed habits that made them appear less perceptive than they truly were, lowering their gaze when voices rose, stepping backward subtly when discussions grew tense, or moving with slow, deliberate breaths that suggested emotional detachment. Even the guards and lower servants used eunuchs as their quiet intermediaries. A guard worried about a suspicious visitor would whisper to a eunuch, knowing the message would reach the right official discreetly. A kitchen servant noticing a concubine's unusual request for herbs would murmur it to a eunuch in the corridor. Eunuchs became channels through which information flowed, not because they sought it, but because everyone trusted their silence. This placed them in the eye of every political storm. They understood more than they could ever acknowledge. They predicted shifts long before they became public. They sensed the jealousy rising between concubines, the tension between the queen and a visiting noblewoman, the pharaoh's growing distrust of a certain advisor. Their insight was unmatched, yet they carried it alone. Some eunuchs subtly helped stabilize the palace. They arranged schedules so that conflicting factions rarely crossed paths. They delayed messages to give the pharaoh time to calm before meeting a tense official. They quietly redirected children away from dangerous gossip. Their actions were not recorded, praised, or even noticed, yet they often prevented conflict before it escalated. Still, the palace remained a place where one misinterpreted glance could destroy a eunuch's life. A concubine could accuse him of favoring a rival's child. A noble could claim he overheard too much. A guard could spread a rumor that he repeated a secret. In the palace, truth mattered less than perception, and eunuchs had no power to correct a perception once it formed. Thus, they learned to move like shadows between political fires, never letting the flames burn them. They survived by mastering a rare balance, to know everything while appearing to know nothing, to see the palace clearly while pretending blindness, to exist inside politics without ever visibly touching it. In the royal palace of ancient Egypt, noise and silence coexisted in layers. Public corridors rang with footsteps, laughter from servants, and the rhythmic chants of priests. But behind the veils, behind the gauzy curtains of the women's quarters, behind the carved doors of private chambers, behind the partitions that separated power from vulnerability, whispers held more weight than proclamations. These whispers shaped relationships, ignited rivalries, soothed fears, and revealed truths never meant to reach official scrolls. And at the center of this world stood the eunuchs, who heard everything without ever being invited to speak. The women's quarters were the most active source of whispers. Queens, concubines, princesses, midwives, and attendants moved through the rooms like flowing water, speaking in soft tones that masked deeper intentions. A queen might whisper advice to her sister, pretending calm while sensing a concubine's rising influence. A concubine might whisper her worries about her child's future, her voice trembling despite her carefully painted lips. Servants whispered about who had received a visit from the pharaoh the night before, about a concubine who seemed unusually hopeful. about the arrival of gifts from foreign lands. Eunuchs lived among these whispers, hearing them as naturally as they heard the rustle of silk robes. A eunuch folding linens at the edge of the room might overhear two concubines speaking of a sudden illness in one of the royal children. Another standing beside the queen's dresser might catch a fragment of her conversation with her trusted attendant. These words were never directed at the eunuchs, yet they absorbed them completely, storing them in the quiet places of their minds. Whispers were not always born from ambition. Many grew from fear. Life in the palace was uncertain for women who had been brought from distant villages or foreign kingdoms. A concubine might whisper her longing for her family. A princess might whisper sadness over a marriage she did not want. An attendant might whisper worry about her brother serving in the army. Eunuchs, moving between chambers with trays or scrolls or garments, heard these soft confessions. They did not react, but sometimes they altered the pace of their steps out of respect for the emotions brushing against them. The queen's chambers held a different kind of whisper, controlled, measured, strategic. The queen understood better than anyone the power of subtle speech. She spoke with her attendants in tones so low the meaning was carried as much through expression as through words. Eunuchs standing nearby learned to read these expressions. The narrowing of her eyes when thinking about an official, the faint tightening of her lips when concerned about her children, the softening of her voice when asking after a servant's well-being. In these rooms, silence was part of the conversation, and eunuchs became fluent in its vocabulary. Not all whispers came from women. Palace scribes whispered about tensions in the treasury. Guards whispered about omens seen during night patrols. Priests whispered warnings about dreams they interpreted in the temple shrine. These quiet exchanges traveled through the palace like threads, weaving a hidden tapestry of concerns. Eunuchs passing each group in their duties heard enough to understand the palace's mood each day, whether tense, hopeful, or uneasy. Because eunuchs were trusted to remain silent, people often whispered to them directly. A concubine, afraid of another woman's jealousy, might approach a eunuch with trembling hands, asking him to watch her child closely. A guard, worried about a suspicious visitor, might whisper a warning into a eunuch's ear. A young princess might lean close, asking if her father was angry with her voice cracking with fear. Eunuchs offered no advice, because they were not permitted to, but their silence gave comfort, and their presence absorbed the fears others could not voice openly. Whispers also carried danger. A rumor spoken too loudly could destroy a concubine's standing. A false accusation whispered by a jealous attendant could force a eunuch to defend himself against charges he had no power to dispute. The palace was a place where whispers traveled quickly, gaining strength with each retelling. Eunuchs learned to distinguish between meaningful whispers and those that threatened to tangle them in unnecessary conflict. They avoided reacting to the latter, letting them fade into the noise of palace life. Within their own quarters, whispers took on a quieter tone. Eunuchs rarely spoke about palace affairs, even among themselves, but they whispered about their physical aches, about memories of childhood, about the difficulty of calming a frightened prince or soothing an irritable concubine. They spoke softly to avoid being overheard, yet these conversations carried more truth than the dozens they listened to each day. They shared their burdens in fragments, short phrases, half-finished thoughts, but even these slivers of connection eased their isolation. Whispers could reveal joy too. A concubine receiving a letter from her family whispered news to her closest attendant. A princess, whispering excitedly about a new kitten, might tug at her eunuch's robe with shining eyes. A young prince, proud of reading a difficult inscription, whispered the words into his eunuch's ear, seeking praise the tutors rarely gave. These moments reminded eunuchs that the palace held warmth, even within its layers of tension. Yet the most powerful whispers were the ones spoken unintentionally, the sighs in the queen's chamber, the soft sob of a lonely concubine at night, the quiet prayers of a worried mother. Eunuchs, trained to appear invisible, often heard these sounds more clearly than words. They felt the palace's heartbeat in those moments, its hopes and fears laid bare. Behind the veils, life unfolded in whispers. They revealed what public voices concealed, what official records ignored, and what the palace pretended not to feel. And the eunuchs, moving like shadows, listening without acknowledgement, became the keepers of this hidden world. hearing the truth spoken too softly for history to remember. Secrets were the true foundation of palace life, more enduring than stone, more powerful than gold, and more dangerous than any weapon. They flowed silently through the corridors of ancient Egypt's royal household, carried in whispers, hidden in gestures, and locked behind carefully controlled expressions. And because eunuchs served in every private space, from the pharaoh's chambers to the women's quarters to the royal children's wing, they became the unintended guardians of nearly all of them. They did not seek secrets. Secrets found them. They gathered around eunuchs naturally, like dust settling into the folds of linens. The burden was inescapable. A eunuch learned early that knowledge was both privilege and peril. As boys, during their training, they were taught to lower their eyes, to breathe quietly, and to let conversations pass over them like wind over water. But once they entered the palace fully, real experience replaced training. They discovered that secrets did not announce themselves. They appeared suddenly, in a concubine's trembling hands, in an advisor's hushed arguments, in a prince's frightened questions, in a priest's unguarded glance. Some secrets were fragile, born from vulnerability. A royal mother might confide her fear that her son was falling behind in his lessons. A concubine might whisper to a eunuch that she felt isolated and afraid. A young princess might admit she dreaded her arranged marriage. Eunuchs listened because they had no choice. Their duties placed them close to these private moments. Yet they were expected to absorb the information without reaction, compassion, or comment. It was a silent emotional labor, one the palace never acknowledged. Other secrets carried political weight. These were the most dangerous. While pouring wine for the pharaoh, a eunuch might overhear advisors debating whether a general could be trusted. While tending to the queen's chambers, he might hear of tensions between powerful priestly factions. While guiding the royal children, he might accidentally witness a heated argument between two nobles about inheritance rights. These fragments, when combined, revealed truths no single official possessed. A eunuch often understood the state of the kingdom more clearly than those who ruled it. But this clarity came with fear. The palace expected eunuchs to know everything, yet repeat nothing. They could not warn one person without betraying another. They could not correct misinformation, even when silence risked misunderstanding. They could not confide in fellow eunuchs, even though those were the only people who might understand. So they carried the weight internally, storing years of knowledge that could never be spoken aloud. Some secrets lingered in their memories for decades. The night a concubine begged them to protect her child, the soft confession of a prince who feared he would never be king. The moment the pharaoh whispered doubts about a trusted official. These experiences shaped the eunuch's understanding of human nature, its ambition, fear, kindness, and cruelty. Yet none of it belonged to them. They were vessels for the secrets of others, never allowed to speak their own. Eunuchs also faced moral dilemmas that no training could prepare them for. What should they do when a secret hinted at danger? If a concubine quietly described a threat against her, should they report it and risk her punishment? If a guard whispered suspicion about an outsider, should they intervene? If a child confided fear of someone in power, how could a eunuch protect them without revealing the source? Every decision carried consequences. A single miscalculation could determine the fate of a life, sometimes their own. They learned to act indirectly. If a concubine seemed unsafe, a eunuch might subtly adjust the guard's schedules. If a prince appeared frightened of a tutor, the eunuch might discreetly arrange to accompany him more closely. If political unrest brewed, the eunuch might slow down certain messages or ensure others moved quickly. Their interventions were never noticed unless they failed. But secrecy isolated them. They could not share burdens with those they served because emotional closeness was forbidden. They could not confide in nobles who viewed them as tools. They could not speak openly with servants who feared being pulled into danger. Even among fellow eunuchs, conversations stayed vague. They communicated only in hints, "Be cautious today," or "Stay near the children." Each man understood the weight behind the words without asking questions. And when mistakes happened, as they inevitably did, secrets became weapons. A concubine, seeking to protect her status, might accuse a eunuch of revealing something he never heard. An official threatened by palace gossip might claim a eunuch was spreading rumors. A guard trying to deflect blame might say a eunuch misdirected him. With no ability to defend themselves, eunuchs often suffered consequences for secrets they never voiced. Still, the palace depended on them. Without eunuchs, secrets would spill recklessly through the corridors. Rivalries would intensify. Children would be unprotected. The pharaoh's vulnerabilities would escape into the public. Eunuchs preserved the palace's fragile balance by holding on to truths too volatile for others to manage. Each night, after extinguishing the lamps and ensuring all doors were secure, a eunuch returned to his narrow room, carrying the weight of another day's hidden knowledge. He lay down silently, knowing tomorrow would bring new secrets, some whispered, some discovered accidentally, some carved into memory forever. It was a quiet burden, heavy yet invisible, carried by men history seldom named. And though no monument honored them, the palace itself stood only because these silent guardians kept its countless secrets alive and unspoken. The palace of ancient Egypt dazzled on the surface, golden columns catching the sun, painted walls illustrating divine stories, courtyards filled with music, incense, and carefully choreographed ceremony. Yet beneath that brilliance existed a hidden framework that kept the entire structure functioning smoothly. It was not the scribes, nor the nobles, nor even the priests who sustained the palace's daily rhythm. It was the eunuchs, whose hands, footsteps, and vigilance shaped almost every moment. They were everywhere and nowhere at once, present in every chamber, yet treated as if they were part of the stone walls themselves. Their work was indispensable, but their presence was expected to remain invisible. Their day began long before anyone else stirred. In the earliest hours, when the palace floors still felt cool beneath bare feet, eunuchs moved like shadows through hallways, lighting lamps where darkness lingered, and extinguishing flames where heat was no longer needed. They inspected rooms for disorder, checked entrances for signs of disturbance, and ensured that every space the royal household would enter that day was calm and prepared. Their movements left no trace, yet without them the palace would awaken in chaos. In the women's quarters, eunuchs arranged bathing basins, fresh linens, jars of scented oils, and ceremonial garments. They inspected jewelry boxes to ensure no pieces had gone missing. They guided servants into their places, correcting mistakes with a subtle gesture rather than a sharp command. Their goal was not to direct attention, but to remove obstacles before anyone noticed they existed. In the pharaoh's chambers, their duties became even more delicate. A eunuch ensured the king's bed was arranged properly, that the incense chosen for the morning matched the pharaoh's mood, that the water for washing was neither too cool nor too warm. These were not tasks performed with pride or flourish. They were carried out with humility, precision, and a kind of quiet devotion. The pharaoh often began his day unaware of the dozens of actions that had already shaped his morning. The royal children depended on monks and tutors for knowledge, but they depended on eunuchs for everything else. Eunuchs ensured they arrived safely at their lessons, ate meals on time, avoided quarrels, and stayed out of danger. They noticed when a child's sandal strap broke, when someone looked unusually tired, or when a prince seemed distracted by unspoken worries. A eunuch's gentle intervention, a hand guiding a shoulder, a redirected path, kept the children from harm without them ever realizing it. Despite their constant influence, eunuchs were rarely acknowledged. Their presence was expected to be a seamless part of palace life. Servants obeyed them because they recognized their authority. Nobles overlooked them because they saw them as part of the furniture. Concubines trusted them because their altered bodies symbolized safety rather than threat. The pharaoh himself often issued commands without turning his head. Confident a eunuch would respond instantly. Their efficiency was so flawless that it disappeared into the background. And yet, their indispensability became most visible during emergencies. If a concubine fainted during a ceremony, eunuchs were at her side faster than the physicians. If a fire sparked unexpectedly in a courtyard, eunuchs coordinated the response, carrying water, clearing the area, calming panicked servants. If a foreign envoy arrived unannounced, Eunuchs arranged chambers, prepared refreshments, and ensured the queen or pharaoh appeared composed when they stepped forward to greet the guest. They did in minutes what officials required hours to plan. Their invisibility also shielded the palace from internal conflict. Eunuchs discreetly separated rivals in the women's quarters by altering schedules. They quieted tensions between guards without involving higher officials. They redirected children away from private arguments. They carried messages that could not be entrusted to anyone else. Their actions prevented misunderstandings from becoming crises without ever being acknowledged. Because they were not allowed to participate in political life, eunuchs often saw more clearly than those who did. They recognized which officials spoke too confidently, which nobles watched the throne too intently, which concubines acted with unusual boldness. They noticed shifts in behavior, the way others noticed changes in weather. Their ability to assess danger quietly made them silent protectors of the royal household. Yet the palace seldom rewarded them. Their quarters were small, their possessions few, their names rarely recorded. They ate after the royal family, rested only when the palace slept, and woke before dawn to begin again. Their long years of service rarely ended in public acknowledgement. A eunuch might spend a lifetime raising a prince, soothing a queen's worries, or preventing unseen dangers, and still die without ceremony. Among themselves, however, they recognized each other's worth. In their narrow quarters at night, they exchanged nods of respect, shared simple meals, and supported one another through exhaustion. Their quiet solidarity gave them the strength to continue. They found meaning in the fact that while they did not hold power, they held responsibility that shaped the palace far more deeply than any throne room proclamation. In the end, the palace could not have existed without them. Their silence kept secrets safe. Their presence maintained order. Their discipline prevented disaster. And their invisibility allowed the royal world to shine, untainted by the effort required to sustain it. The eunuchs were the palace's unseen architecture, supporting every wall, every corridor, every breath of royal life. Beneath the polished rituals and formal hierarchies of the Egyptian palace existed a quieter, unacknowledged system, a living network of awareness, cooperation, and subtle communication that kept the entire royal household functioning with astonishing precision. It had no official name, but its presence guided the palace more effectively than many decrees from the vizier. This was the shadow network, an unspoken understanding shared among eunuchs, attendants, servants, and lower officials who navigated the palace's hidden rhythms. At its center were the eunuchs, whose access to every chamber, corridor, and household member made them the natural anchors of this invisible web. The network emerged not from rebellion or conspiracy, but from necessity. The palace was a vast, complex organism, full of intersecting lives and competing priorities. No written instructions could account for the unpredictable flow of its daily life. An unexpected visit from a priest, a concubine falling ill, a child's sudden tantrum, or a political messenger arriving at the wrong hour. Eunuchs, who moved easily through both public and private spaces, learned to anticipate these disruptions before they reached the attention of officials. Information traveled through the network in forms so subtle that no noble would have recognized them as communication. A eunuch smoothing the edge of a curtain could signal that the queen was upset and needed silence. A servant placing a jug slightly off-center on a table might be indicating the arrival of a visitor. A guard adjusting his stance at a doorway could warn of tension brewing in the harem. These gestures were not taught through instruction. They arose naturally from the shared experiences of those who lived beneath the palace's surface. Within this network, eunuchs acted as quiet coordinators. If a concubine was emotional after receiving distressing news, a eunuch might give a slight nod to a nearby attendant to bring calming herbs. If a foreign envoy arrived unexpectedly, a eunuch could discreetly guide cooks, cleaners, and guards into motion without raising alarm. If the pharaoh appeared tense after a meeting with officials, a eunuch might subtly adjust the evening schedule, ensuring that meals were served promptly, prayers conducted gently, and interruptions minimized. Servants often relied on eunuchs for guidance. A linen washer unsure where to deliver fresh sheets would look to the nearest eunuch for direction. A kitchen worker preparing meals for a visiting noble would wait for a eunuch's signal before presenting dishes. A gardener noticing unusual activity near the queen's chamber might quietly inform a eunuch rather than risk approaching a higher-ranking official. Eunuchs acted as bridges between the structured world of officials and the fluid reality of everyday palace life. The shadow network became most active in times of tension. When the queen and a concubine exchanged strained glances, eunuchs quietly redirected their routes to avoid confrontation. When a prince grew restless and refused to attend his lessons, a eunuch might intervene with gentle persuasion, sparing tutors from struggle. When rumors circulated of political unrest beyond the palace walls, eunuchs monitored who entered each room, ensuring only trusted individuals approached the pharaoh or his family. Even illness activated the network. If a royal child coughed during a lesson, a eunuch would send a silent message to the kitchen for herbal remedies, signal the attendants to clean the chamber more thoroughly, and position himself to keep the child calm, all before anyone spoke a word. By the time the queen heard of her child's symptoms, the palace had already reacted. Though essential, the network operated without recognition. Officials believed their management kept the palace in order, unaware that eunuchs quietly corrected their mistakes. Advisors assumed their decisions shaped daily routines, never realizing how often eunuchs adjusted those routines for safety or harmony. The pharaoh himself walked through hallways that seemed effortlessly serene, unaware that dozens of subtle interventions kept it that way. Yet the network also protected the eunuchs. They relied on each other's glances and signals to avoid danger. If a concubine grew suspicious of a eunuch, others would quietly offer warnings, changing his duties temporarily, or ensuring he never entered that chamber alone. If an official grew angry and blamed a eunuch for something beyond his control, another eunuch might step in with quiet humility, diffusing the situation. Their cooperation formed a silent shield. The network functioned without a leader or hierarchy. No eunuch gave orders, no servant received a formal command. Each person simply understood their role in the larger flow of palace life. Their instincts, sharpened by years of experience, aligned naturally. A eunuch adjusting a child's cloak could trigger a series of quiet actions, a servant clearing the hallway, another preparing the garden path, guards tightening their positions, all without a single verbal instruction. During festivals, the network expanded. Eunuchs coordinated with musicians, cooks, dancers, and priests to ensure perfect timing. If a torch flickered during a ritual, someone corrected it instinctively. If a noblewoman hesitated before entering a ceremony, an attendant guided her smoothly. The palace's majesty during public events was not the product of royal brilliance, but the work of silent coordination behind the scenes. Despite the network's strength, it remained fragile. It depended on trust, intuition, and a shared sense of survival. When a eunuch died, the network shifted, absorbing the loss quietly. When a new eunuch joined, the network adjusted to include him. The palace's official structure might ignore the contributions of the lower ranks, but this invisible web understood each person's worth. The shadow network was the backbone of the royal household, the unseen force that maintained harmony, protected the royal family, and ensured that the palace moved with grace even in moments of turmoil. It existed only because the eunuchs held the center, steady and watchful, weaving together countless small actions into a seamless whole that kept the heart of Egypt beating quietly behind its golden walls. In ancient Egypt, where symbols carried as much meaning as spoken language, the body itself communicated power, purity, and social purpose. A pharaoh's body represented divine authority. A priest's body signified ritual purity. A soldier's body marked loyalty through scars and strength. But the eunuchs' bodies, altered, controlled, and reshaped, became symbols of something more complicated: obedience, trust, sacrifice, and separation. Their physical form told a story the palace preferred never to speak aloud, yet relied on every single day. To those who lived inside the palace, the eunuch's body was not simply a sign of physical change. It was a declaration of ownership. Their castration marked them as permanently bound to the royal household, with no hope of personal lineage, no chance of starting a family, and no claim to inheritance. Because they could not father children, officials viewed them as incapable of betrayal, driven by family ambition. Their bodies proclaimed loyalty in the harshest way possible. This symbolism was especially potent in the women's quarters. No other adult men were allowed inside those chambers. Eunuchs, reshaped by force in their youth, were seen as safe presences, neither threatening to the modesty of the women nor competing with the pharaoh for intimacy. Their bodies granted them access to spaces guarded by strict religious and cultural boundaries. In these rooms filled with perfume, jewelry, embroidered linens, and quiet confidences, the eunuch became a guardian, mediator, and silent companion. Their altered form was treated almost like a key, one that opened doors other men could never cross. But this role came at the cost of personal identity. For many eunuchs, physical transformation blurred the line between categories. They did not share the ritual duties of priests, the strength of soldiers, or the potential of noblemen. They could not participate in the rites of manhood, nor fully belong to the world of women they served. Their bodies placed them in an in-between space, respected for their utility, but never fully accepted as belonging to any group. In a society where identity was deeply tied to physical roles, this liminal existence could be isolating. Their altered bodies also changed in ways that shaped how others viewed them. Many eunuchs developed softer facial features, higher voices, or smoother skin as a result of their castration occurring before adulthood. Some gained weight more easily or suffered from fatigue. Their strength varied. Some remained sturdy and physically capable, while others experienced weakness or health issues. These changes became part of their unspoken symbolism. They were not like other men, and the palace relied on this difference. Some Egyptians believed eunuchs possessed a kind of heightened sensitivity, as if their transformation granted them sharper intuition or emotional awareness. This belief likely grew from observation. Eunuchs often showed exceptional patience with royal children, deep attentiveness to the queen's moods, and remarkable skill at navigating tense situations. Their physical quietness, their smooth step, their calm presence, all contributed to the illusion that they were beings shaped more by duty than emotion. But inside, many eunuchs felt the emotional cost of their symbolic bodies. The palace regarded them as loyal servants, yet seemed indifferent to the personal loss carved into their flesh. They watched mothers cradle newborns, concubines speak of longing, fathers boast of their sons, and young couples whisper promises of love. Eunuchs lived inside a world where family defined legacy, yet they themselves could have none. Their bodies reminded them daily of what had been taken, and what they could never regain. Even their clothing became symbolic. While nobles adorned themselves with gold collars and brightly colored linen, eunuchs wore simpler garments, usually pale or muted shades that blended with the palace walls. Their jewelry was minimal. Their hair was kept short, tidy, controlled. Everything about their appearance reinforced their role. Quiet, unobtrusive, dependable. They had to look calm even when their hearts weren't. They had to look neutral even when their minds carried the weight of countless secrets. Foreign envoys often took note of eunuchs during royal receptions. They observed how smoothly the eunuchs moved, how attentively they managed the pharaoh's needs, and how closely they hovered near the children and royal women. To outsiders, eunuchs became evidence of Egypt's power, proof that the kingdom could reshape bodies for its purposes and enforce absolute loyalty within its households. Their presence conveyed discipline and order, a sense that the palace could control even the most intimate aspects of life. Despite this symbolic importance, eunuchs received little public recognition. Their names were rarely carved into monuments. Their faces appeared on no walls. Their stories were preserved only in fleeting mentions on papyrus, often as part of someone else's narrative. In death, they were mourned by a handful of fellow eunuchs or servants, not by the kingdom they served so faithfully. The palace valued their function, not their humanity. Yet many eunuchs found quiet pride in their role. They understood that their bodies, though altered, were central to the palace's stability. They protected children who would one day become rulers. They stood by queens during their most vulnerable moments. They guarded secrets that could topple dynasties. Their physical transformation chained them to service, but it also placed them in the very heart of royal life. In the end, a eunuch's body was more than a symbol of what was taken from him. It was a testament to the complex, painful, and indispensable role he played in shaping the daily world of ancient Egypt's palace. Within the grandeur of the Egyptian palace, its golden halls, perfumed chambers, and meticulously ordered routines, there existed a quieter, hidden world where human connections struggled to survive. The eunuchs lived at the crossroads of power and intimacy, constantly surrounded by people yet barred from forming true attachments. The palace required their loyalty, their silence, their obedience, but not their hearts. Still, in the spaces between duties, in the whispered hours before dawn, or the gentle quiet after the palace slept, friendships took shape. Fragile, cautious, and often wordless, these friendships became lifelines in a world that demanded emotional restraint. Eunuchs shared more than a role. They shared a past marked by the same trauma. As boys, they had endured the painful transition that reshaped their bodies and futures. They had recovered in the chamber of quiet, learning to suppress pain long before they understood the palace's emotional demands. This shared foundation, though rarely spoken aloud, formed the first unspoken bond between them. Even without words, each understood the other's suffering. A single glance across the training hall could say, "I know what you endured," and the nod that followed answered, "And I know what you carry still." Once assigned to their palace duties, eunuchs spent their days serving different wings, yet their paths constantly crossed. Two eunuchs tending the royal children might exchange a brief smile when a young prince declared proudly that he could tie his own sash. Others working in the queen's chambers might share a raised eyebrow when a concubine's petty complaint threatened to disrupt the entire household. In these subtle reactions, friendships began, built not through extended conversations, but through shared experiences and silent understanding. Their friendships often grew in the quiet spaces of routine. In the early mornings, as they prepared basins of water and arranged linens, they moved around each other with familiarity. One eunuch might steady a jug to keep it from slipping, as another reached past him. A third might pass an oil lamp without being asked. These small interactions built a sense of cooperation, a comforting rhythm that required no speech but affirmed their connection. It was at night, however, when the palace grew still, that these friendships revealed their true depth. After hours of guiding children, enduring tensions in the women's quarters, or navigating delicate tasks in the pharaoh's chambers, eunuchs returned to their communal sleeping quarters, simple stone rooms with reed mats neatly aligned. They removed their sandals, washed their hands, and sat quietly in the dim light of an oil lamp. Only then, when the palace demanded nothing of them, could their humanity re-emerge. They shared fragments of thoughts, never full stories, never sensitive details, but enough to ease the weight of the day. One might say softly, "The young princess could not sleep again." Another replied, "She dreams of storms." A third added, "Leave her door open tomorrow." It helps. These exchanges, though small, carried warmth. In a place where their voices were usually background noise, these moments allowed them to feel heard. Some friendships grew deeper, strengthened by shared burdens. A eunuch responsible for an anxious concubine might find comfort confiding, vaguely, but honestly, in a trusted companion. Another who served the pharaoh directly might hint at tension in the king's mood. Though they never discussed palace secrets, they understood the emotional toll of holding so much inside. Support came in quiet forms, a friend placing an extra piece of bread beside another's mat, a hand resting briefly on a shoulder, a silent promise to stay close when the palace felt particularly volatile. The palace, however, did not welcome visible affection. Eunuchs who laughed too freely or spoke too often risked drawing attention. Officials might separate them by assigning them to different wings or altering their schedules. They learned to guard their bonds carefully, protecting them from scrutiny by keeping their interactions discreet. A shared glance in a corridor, a subtle gesture of encouragement, or a brief moment of stillness beside each other was often the fullest expression of friendship allowed. Despite these restrictions, friendships played a crucial role in their survival. Eunuchs looked out for one another in ways the palace never acknowledged. An experienced eunuch might quietly guide a younger one away from a dangerous situation, a jealous concubine, a short-tempered guard, or an emotionally charged room. They warned each other with subtle signals, a slightly raised hand, a tightened jaw, a stillness that said be cautious. In the shadow network that supported palace order, their friendships strengthened the web. Loss, too, shaped their bonds. Eunuchs rarely lived long, given the wear on their bodies and the emotional strain of their roles. When one disappeared, whether reassigned, dismissed, or gone without explanation, the others felt the absence deeply. They could not hold ceremonies or speak openly of their grief, but they honored their friend quietly. One might leave a lamp burning a little longer. Another might take over the missing eunuch's tasks for the day. They carried their mourning silently, as they carried everything else. Yet even fragile friendships brought moments of joy. A eunuch teaching another how to fold linens more efficiently. Two sharing a laugh over a child's innocent mischief. A group enjoying a rare breeze in the courtyard after completing their duties. These moments reminded them that even within walls that demanded obedience and restraint, human connection could bloom. Friendships in forbidden spaces did not resemble the open bonds of ordinary life. They were quiet, brief, carefully guarded, but profoundly meaningful. They gave the eunuch strength to endure the palace's demands, comfort to offset loneliness, and a sense of identity beyond their duties. In a world determined to make them invisible, friendship made them feel seen. The Egyptian royal palace was never silent. From dawn until the deep hours of night, footsteps echoed across stone floors, servants moved in choreographed patterns, guards paced their posts, concubines whispered in shaded alcoves, and priests passed through corridors trailing incense and softly murmured prayers. Yet within this constant flow of life, one group moved through the palace with a profound and quiet solitude. The eunuchs, trusted, present, and indispensable, lived surrounded by people but untouched by genuine belonging. Their loneliness did not stem from isolation, but from being ever present, without ever being part of the world around them. Their roles placed them in the palace's most intimate spaces. They stood beside the pharaoh during private rituals, soothed the queen during moments of fear, accompanied the royal children through their days, and mediated conflicts in the harem. They observed love, joy, jealousy, anger, ambition, and grief with their own eyes, yet none of these emotions could be theirs to share. Every connection they witnessed reminded them of the emotional life forbidden to them, the family they would never build, the bond they would never form, the future they could never claim. Loneliness began early, long before they understood its name. As boys, after undergoing the transformation that marked their role forever, they woke in the chamber of quiet, surrounded by others who suffered the same fate but too weak or afraid to speak. Their bodies healed, but something deeper remained wounded. They emerged into palace training halls where discipline replaced affection and obedience took the place of comfort. Even though they lived among peers, intimacy was discouraged. Bonds were seen as distractions. Dependence was considered a threat to duty. As adults, their days were filled with people, yet void of personal closeness. In the women's quarters, eunuchs witnessed tender moments between mothers and children, moments that stirred a bittersweet ache beneath their calm faces. When a concubine rocked her infant gently, humming a lullaby from her homeland, the eunuch standing in the corner felt a longing he could not express. When a princess braided her sister's hair while whispering secrets, he felt the warmth of sibling affection, but could only observe silently. These scenes passed before him like shadows cast on a wall, visible but untouchable. Their work with the royal children deepened this ache. Many eunuchs formed quiet attachments to the children they raised. A prince who clung to a eunuch's hand when frightened. A princess who fell asleep leaning on a eunuch's shoulder. These moments brought warmth to the eunuchs' lives, yet they also carried a sharp truth. The child would eventually grow up, step into a new role, and leave them behind. The separation always came without ceremony. One day, the eunuch was a constant presence in the child's life. The next, he was reassigned elsewhere. The palace expected the eunuch to continue without pause, but the emotional void lingered. Even the pharaoh, surrounded by advisors, guards, wives, and servants, relied on eunuchs during his most vulnerable moments. In late-night hours, when the kingdom's burdens pressed heavily on him, he sometimes spoke softly in the presence of the eunuch on duty. His voice revealed worry, doubt, or exhaustion he never showed publicly. The eunuch listened without responding, absorbing the king's confessions while knowing no one would ever absorb his own. He carried the secrets and sorrows of others, but had no space to release his own. Among fellow eunuchs, friendships offered some relief, but even these were restrained. They could not openly discuss their burdens, for fear of disciplinary consequences. Their conversations remained safe, shallow, practical. Still, in subtle gestures, sharing food, adjusting another's cloak, offering a place to sit, they communicated understanding. But however comforting, these connections never fully alleviated the deeper loneliness carved into them by a lifetime of duty and silence. The palace itself amplified this solitude. Its magnificence was designed to honor the royal family, not those who served them. Eunuchs slept in narrow chambers with simple reed mats and minimal belongings. No murals decorated their walls. No servants tended to their needs. Their quarters were quiet, functional, and devoid of sentiment, mirroring how the palace saw them. Essential tools, not individuals with emotions or desires. During festivals and grand ceremonies, the contrast grew even sharper. Eunuchs ensured every detail was perfect, torches arranged precisely, offerings prepared correctly, musicians guided to their places. They orchestrated harmony from behind the scenes. But once the celebrations began, they faded into the edges. Nobles feasted, musicians played, dancers twirled in vibrant linen, and laughter filled the halls. Eunuchs watched from shadows, absorbing the brightness without ever stepping into it. Their loneliness was not simply emotional, it was existential. They belonged to everyone yet to no one. They were always present yet always peripheral. The palace trusted them with its deepest secrets and most delicate tasks, yet gave them no identity beyond their service. Their lives were defined by proximity to affection, yet denied affection itself. Still, many eunuchs carried their solitude with grace. They poured their longing into duty, polishing lamps with extra care, soothing frightened children with exceptional tenderness, maintaining order where others created chaos. In small ways, they shaped the palace's peace, even if they could not claim any part of its warmth. At night, when the palace finally slept, eunuchs sometimes paused in empty corridors, breathing in the stillness. They looked out at the moonlit Nile, letting the faint breeze brush their skin. In those moments, loneliness felt less like a wound and more like a companion, silent, consistent, and strangely familiar. It was not a burden they chose, but one they learned to live with, and sometimes even to understand. In a palace built on perfection, perfect rituals, perfect lineage, perfect hierarchy, there existed a group whose bodies bore the permanent mark of imperfection forced upon them. The eunuchs of ancient Egypt lived with responsibilities equal to those of trusted advisors, guardians, and attendants. Yet their bodies were a constant reminder of what had been taken from them. Their altered physiology shaped not only their identity, but the fragile state of their health. Beneath their calm expressions and steady service lay a daily struggle against weakness, imbalance, and the long-term effects of a transformation their young bodies were never meant to endure. Castration performed before puberty drastically altered the body's development. Eunuchs often entered adulthood with softer muscles, slower reflexes, and less physical stamina than ordinary men. Some grew tall with narrow shoulders and smooth skin, their limbs appearing longer because their bones continued growing without the hormonal signals that closed growth plates. Others developed rounded features, soft cheeks, and high voices, which distinguished them not only socially, but physically. These visible differences were often misunderstood by palace officials, who judged them as natural rather than forced. Yet the deepest changes were hidden inside. Without normal testosterone levels, eunuchs were prone to brittle bones. A simple fall could result in fractures. Long hours standing in palace corridors stiffened their joints and strained their backs. Many suffered chronic fatigue and exhaustion that no amount of sleep seemed to erase. But their duties were constant, and the palace had little concern for personal discomfort. A eunuch who limped or winced simply learned to move slower, smoother, quieter. Their immune systems, altered by hormonal imbalance, were often weaker. Eunuchs fell ill more easily than other servants. A minor cold could linger for weeks. A fever could drain them completely. Some developed respiratory issues from spending long hours in incense-heavy chambers. Others struggled with digestive problems caused by irregular mealtimes and stress. Yet they rarely received the same level of medical care given to the royals or priests. A eunuch's health mattered only so far as it affected his ability to perform his tasks. Despite this fragility, their roles demanded constant vigilance. They escorted active children, supervised energetic servants, managed delicate rituals, and assisted concubines through unpredictable emotions and needs. Their daily responsibilities required both mental focus and physical steadiness. Some adapted by learning how to conserve their strength, taking slow breaths while standing for long hours, leaning subtly against walls without drawing attention, adjusting their posture to distribute weight more comfortably. They became experts in endurance, not through strength, but through discipline. Pain was an ordinary companion. Some experienced lingering nerve damage from the crude procedure performed in childhood. Others developed headaches or dizziness from long days with little rest. Many eunuchs trained themselves to control their breathing, masking discomfort even when their bodies trembled. They learned to smile gently when approached, maintaining the illusion of calm competence. The palace valued their quiet steadiness, but never acknowledged the physical cost behind it. Emotional stress also affected their health. Eunuchs were entrusted with the royal family's most intimate moments: births, illnesses, arguments, grief, yet could never share their own struggles. Holding secrets and absorbing others' burdens weighed heavily on their hearts and minds. Some internalized their stress until it manifested in physical symptoms: chest tightness, insomnia, trembling hands. But expressing distress was forbidden. Their duty required composure, so they carried their suffering silently. Nutrition further complicated their condition. Eunuchs did not eat at the royal table but consumed whatever food was available after the household had been served. Sometimes they ate well: leftover roasted fowl, stewed vegetables, honeyed bread. Other times their meals were sparse. Their bodies, already deprived of hormonal balance, needed consistent nourishment, but palace life seldom allowed it. Hunger became a familiar ache, one they learned to ignore while performing demanding tasks. Climate added another challenge. Egypt's heat was unforgiving, particularly inside the palace where eunuchs worked long hours in enclosed, ornate rooms with limited airflow. Their altered bodies struggled to regulate temperature. Some fainted in the hottest months. Others developed skin conditions from sweat trapped beneath linen garments. Yet their responsibilities did not change with the weather. They were expected to remain attentive and composed, even when their bodies protested. Medical remedies existed, but eunuchs rarely received them. Physicians treated the royal family, priests, and warriors. Eunuchs relied instead on whisper-shared knowledge: herbs to ease headaches, oils to soothe irritated skin, banda leaves for cooling the body. Their small community developed its own quiet system of care. One eunuch might press a cool cloth into another's hand without speaking. Another might leave a reed basket of healing herbs beside a friend's mat. These acts of mutual support, though small, formed a lifeline. Over time, the palace recognized that eunuchs aged differently. Some remained youthful in appearance long past the age when ordinary men developed lines and gray hair. Others aged rapidly due to stress and illness. A eunuch who looked young might feel old inside, his bones aching with every step. And yet, the palace rarely adjusted their duties. They served until they could no longer stand, and only then were they replaced. Despite frail health, eunuchs developed an extraordinary resilience. Their endurance was not born from physical strength, but from quiet determination. Their bodies may have been weakened, but their sense of duty strengthened them. They survived not because the palace supported them, but because they supported one another. In the end, their vulnerability made their service even more remarkable. The altered body that marked their difference also revealed their strength. Strength found not in muscle, but in the will to continue despite pain, loneliness, and fatigue. Their bodies told a story of sacrifice, endurance, and unspoken courage, hidden beneath the polished perfection of palace life. When night finally settled over the Egyptian palace, the world above fell into sleep. Torches dimmed to embers, servants retreated to their quarters, and the steady hum of activity faded into a soft, distant hush. But for the eunuchs, nighttime was not merely rest. It was reflection, reckoning, and the only moment when they could encounter themselves without distraction. The silence of the palace's deepest hours revealed truths they could not acknowledge during daylight. Their thoughts, suppressed beneath duty and discipline, resurfaced in the quiet like grains of sand beneath still water. Their nights began the same way their days began, in routine. Eunuchs returned to their modest quarters, rooms with low ceilings, thin mats, simple clay lamps, and a faint smell of burning oil. They removed their linen garments, washed their faces and hands in a small basin, and sat on the edge of their mats. No chatter filled these rooms. No laughter echoed. Their bodies, exhausted from standing in doorways, guiding children, or calming tense royal moments, finally loosened. But their minds remained alert. Silence invited contemplation. A eunuch might stare at the floor, tracing the faint cracks in the stone, allowing his thoughts to drift where they could not go during the day. He might recall the concubine who cried earlier, her tears falling silently into her lap while he stood guard. He might think of the young prince who reached for his hand before a lesson. He might remember a conversation overheard between officials discussing matters of state he could never speak of. These memories replayed like quiet echoes, each one revealing something about his place in the palace. Many eunuchs carried memories of their childhoods, fragments of life before the palace, before transformation. These recollections were often blurred by time, but certain details lingered. A mother calling their name, a father lifting them high into the air, siblings laughing near a riverbank. At night, these memories became painfully vivid. They were reminders of a life they lost too young, a life their bodies could never return to. Some eunuchs pressed their palms to their chest, as if trying to hold on to the fading warmth of their past. Others contemplated the future, not the royal family's future, which they shaped daily through their service, but their own. What would become of them as they aged? Would they be reassigned to lesser tasks? Would their bodies fail before their duties ended? Would they die quietly, unnoticed except by the few eunuchs who shared their quarters? The palace did not carve their names into walls or record their stories on papyrus. They knew their purpose was temporary, their presence replaceable. Facing this truth in the silence of night was both sobering and deeply lonely. Yet night also gave them a rare chance to feel free. In the soft glow of the oil lamp, with no eyes watching, they allowed themselves small indulgences forbidden during the day. Some hummed songs they remembered from childhood. Others whispered prayers, not formal temple chants, but personal pleas for strength or peace. A few drew simple shapes in the dust beside their mats, letting their hands move the way children's hands once did. These gestures did not break palace rules, but they softened the weight of them. Eunuchs also found comfort in the quiet company of one another. Though conversation was sparse, their shared presence brought a sense of belonging. One eunuch might shift closer to another, leaning back to back for warmth. Another might hand a companion a piece of leftover bread saved from earlier. Sometimes in the dimness, a eunuch would speak softly, not about secrets or palace politics, but about simple reflections. The young princess smiled today, or the Nile looked calm this morning. In these tiny exchanges they found humanity. Some eunuchs wrote privately, although they were forbidden from keeping personal records. They wrote not to preserve history, but to release thoughts that weighed heavily on their hearts. On scraps of papyrus or discarded parchment, they scribbled fragments of feelings: loneliness, gratitude, longing, memories, hopes. These writings were temporary. Once the ink dried, they quietly burned them so no one would ever discover their inner lives. The faint smell of smoke lingering in their chambers testified to the existence of emotions the palace did not permit them to express. Physically, nighttime was also when their bodies reminded them of their limitations. As they lay down to rest, pain surfaced, stiff knees from hours of standing, aching backs from guiding children, lingering discomfort from their altered anatomy. They pressed their fingers into sore muscles, stretched their legs beneath thin blankets, and breathed deeply until the ache softened. Their exhaustion was not the exhaustion of laborers who worked the fields or soldiers who marched into battle. It was the exhaustion of constant restraint, of being present yet never allowed to be fully human. Sometimes, through small openings in their chambers, eunuchs gazed at the night sky. The stars above the palace glittered over the Nile, timeless and indifferent. In the vastness of the sky, they found perspective. The palace, so demanding, so consuming, felt smaller from this distance. The river of time stretched beyond their isolated lives. Some eunuchs imagined what the world might have looked like had their fate been different, had they become scribes, farmers, or fathers. The stars did not answer, but their silence felt comforting. And yet, despite the loneliness, the pain, and the unspoken longing, many eunuchs ended each night with acceptance. This was their life. This was their role. They found meaning not in praise, which they would never receive, but in quiet duty, in guiding a child's steps, in protecting a queen from distress, in maintaining order on days when the palace threatened to fracture. When sleep finally came, it was shallow but peaceful. Their dreams were often simple: walking beside the Nile, sitting beneath a palm tree, or hearing a familiar voice calling them home. Dreams gave them what the palace could not: momentary freedom. With dawn, the silence ended. The palace awakened, and the eunuchs rose once more, ready to serve. The harem of ancient Egypt was a world sealed from nearly all men, a realm of women, children, perfumes, silks, and secrets. It was a place where politics intertwined with tenderness, where alliances formed between whispers, and where beauty existed not merely as ornament, but as currency. Into this deeply guarded world entered only one category of male, the eunuch, not because they were trusted more, but because their transformed bodies placed them outside the realm of typical manhood. They became the genderless guardians of the harem, seen as safe, neutral, and controllable. But within that supposed neutrality lay a complex identity shaped by duty, restriction, and emotional paradox. From the outside, the harem was imagined as a place of luxury and indolence. But eunuchs, who moved through its chambers daily, understood its true nature. It was a place of constant tension, quiet rivalries, and emotional volatility. Women competed for affection, influence, and survival. A misplaced word could shift favor. A single rumor could end a life. Eunuchs walked through these rooms with calm precision, their composed presence stabilizing an environment always on the edge of imbalance. Their role began at the threshold. No ordinary man crossed into the harem. Eunuchs served as both gatekeepers and mediators. They controlled who entered the women's quarters, servants, physicians, messengers, and watched carefully for signs of danger or disorder. Their bodies functioned as proof of trustworthiness. Their voices carried authority not through force, but through the palace's insistence that they posed no threat. Yet this assumption overlooked the psychological power they held. They saw every tear, every argument, every moment of weakness. They could make or break a day simply by choosing to intervene or not. Inside the harem, their duties expanded. They guided young concubines adjusting to palace life, taught them how to navigate complex hierarchies, and helped them maintain composure in front of more powerful women. During childbirth, eunuchs acted as assistants, bringing water, herbs, and cushions, though they never approached the birthing chamber itself. They coordinated schedules so that the pharaoh's favored women received proper preparation before being summoned. They organized gifts, messages, and discreet exchanges between chambers. They listened without reacting, observed without intruding. But their neutral status came with emotional burden. Eunuchs often witnessed pain they could not alleviate. A concubine sobbing over a lost pregnancy. A dismissed woman packing her belongings in silent humiliation. A mother begging for more time with her child. Because eunuchs were forbidden from offering personal comfort, they responded only with gentle gestures, adjusting a curtain to provide privacy, placing a cup of cool water within reach, or quietly reorganizing a day's schedule to reduce stress. These small acts often carried the weight of compassion in a place where vulnerability was dangerous. The harem's children were the eunuch's primary joy and deepest sorrow. They tended to princes and princesses with extraordinary tenderness, tying sandals, soothing nightmares, watching over their early games. Children loved freely, unbound by adult prejudices. They clung to eunuchs' robes, laughed in their presence, asked endless questions. But as soon as they reached a certain age, when politics overshadowed innocence, they were removed from the eunuch's care. A boy destined for priesthood or military training disappeared from the harem with little explanation. A girl preparing for marriage was moved to another wing. Each separation left behind a silence the eunuchs bore quietly. Their presence also stirred complex reactions among the women. Some concubines treated them warmly, speaking to them like older brothers or trusted confidants. Others viewed them with suspicion, fearing the influence they held despite their altered bodies. A few resented them for being present during vulnerable moments, seeing their genderless state as a poor justification for such intimacy. But no matter the treatment, eunuchs remained composed. Their safety depended on avoiding emotional entanglement, even when the women's lives unfolded like open scrolls before them. Still, the harem was not hostile to them. In many ways, it was the closest they had to a home. Unlike the public wings of the palace, where eunuchs blended into the background, the harem acknowledged their presence. Children greeted them with smiles. Women trusted them with private tasks. Their absence was felt when they were reassigned. Even if they were not fully embraced, they were seen. And being seen in the palace was a rare gift. Yet the eunuchs lived under constant reminders of their difference. Their clothing marked them as neither man nor woman. Their voices, often softer and higher, set them apart. Their movements were expected to be measured, gentle, unobtrusive. The very traits that allowed them into the harem also distanced them from any sense of personal belonging. They existed in a liminal state, present in a world of femininity, yet unable to participate in its bonds. The palace justified their presence as practical necessity, but the emotional toll was profound. The harem offered glimpses of warmth, tenderness, and family, things eunuchs longed for yet could never claim. At night, when they returned to their sparse quarters, they carried with them the echoes of lullabies, laughter, arguments, and whispered dreams. They belonged everywhere and nowhere, entrusted with the heart of the palace yet denied the connections that made those hearts beat. Despite this, eunuchs fulfilled their roles with grace. They steadied the harem's delicate balance, protected the women and children within its walls, and ensured that the palace's most intimate realm functioned smoothly. Their genderless identity, though imposed, became a shield, allowing them to move between worlds that otherwise never touched. In a palace defined by roles, the eunuch's existence was a reminder that identity could be shaped by forces beyond one's choosing. They were not men, they were not women. They were guardians, quiet, vigilant, and essential. From the moment a boy was chosen, or taken, to become a eunuch, his life ceased to be his own. The palace did not merely employ eunuchs, it shaped them, owned them, and depended on them with a quiet ferocity. Service was not their duty, it was their fate. They were bound to it by their altered bodies, their training, and the social reality that offered them no path beyond the palace walls. This lifetime of service shaped every breath they took, every step they walked, and every thought they allowed themselves to have. Their service began in childhood, long before they understood what a lifetime meant. After the procedure that transformed them, they entered years of instruction. They memorized palace protocols, learned to read expressions and movements, mastered the art of silence, and practiced tasks with relentless repetition. They were taught how to fold linen so perfectly that no wrinkle remained, how to kneel without sound, how to extinguish a lamp without leaving smoke. They learned to anticipate needs before anyone voiced them. These skills were not merely practical. They instilled the understanding that a eunuch's worth lay entirely in how well he served. As adolescents, they were assigned to specific palace wings. Some tended the harem, learning the delicate balance required to manage rivalries among concubines. Others served the royal children, guiding them gently through their days. A select few were chosen to serve the pharaoh or queen directly, a position that demanded not only loyalty, but absolute emotional discipline. From this moment forward, their lives followed the rhythms of those they served. If the queen woke at dawn, they woke earlier. If the pharaoh paced through the night, they remained by his side without complaint. Their time was not measured by the sun, but by the needs of the royal household. Their roles grew heavier with age. A eunuch's steady composure made him invaluable during crises. When a concubine fainted, when a child fell ill, when tensions rose between palace factions, he stepped forward without hesitation, offering aid with calm precision. But each responsibility came with invisible cost. A eunuch might spend an entire night comforting a terrified princess, yet still rise before dawn to resume his duties. He could never show fatigue or frustration. Service demanded composure, and composure demanded silence. The palace rewarded their loyalty in ways that were practical but not personal. Eunuchs were given food, clothing, and shelter. They were ensured safety so long as they followed rules flawlessly. They could walk freely through spaces forbidden to ordinary men. But these privileges were not signs of affection. They were tools. The palace needed eunuchs to be efficient, obedient, and ever-present. A eunuch who faltered too often from illness or age was quietly reassigned. One who made a significant mistake might be dismissed or punished. Their value rested entirely on their usefulness. Because they lacked families of their own, eunuchs often served for decades, their identities molded entirely by the palace's demands. Some found pride in their work, guiding a prince from childhood to adulthood, ensuring peace within the harem, preventing conflicts with quiet intervention. They took satisfaction in order, precision, and the knowledge that their actions quietly shaped the palace's stability. In these moments, service felt like purpose. But others felt the weight of lifelong servitude more deeply. They watched nobles grow old, surrounded by children and grandchildren, while they themselves aged alone. They saw the royal family's lineage expand through generations, while their own stories ended with them. They were essential to the palace, yet forgotten the moment they stopped serving. Their sense of belonging became complicated. They lived close to the royal family, yet always on the edge of their world. They heard intimate truths, yet were never invited to speak their own. They spent years guiding children, who later became rulers, but those same adults rarely acknowledged their contributions publicly. To live a lifetime in service was to be seen constantly and remembered only vaguely. As eunuchs grew older, the palace often shifted their duties to less physically demanding roles. An elderly eunuch might tend to the archives of the harem, organize ceremonial clothing, or oversee new attendants. In these roles, he became a quiet mentor to younger eunuchs, teaching them not only tasks, but the unspoken rules necessary for survival. It was one of the few ways a eunuch could leave a legacy, through the hands of those who followed. Yet even in old age, they remained bound to service. The palace did not retire eunuchs with honor or ceremony. They continued working until their bodies could no longer endure the strain. Only then, quietly and without formal acknowledgement, they were excused from duty. Some spent their final days in small chambers near the servant quarters. Others were cared for by younger eunuchs, one of the rare gestures of affection allowed within their constrained lives. When a eunuch died, the palace did not hold elaborate rites. His body was washed by fellow eunuchs, wrapped in linen, and buried without fanfare. The royal household continued its routines without pause. The pharaoh's family might not even hear of his passing, yet in the hearts of his fellow eunuchs, his absence left a lasting ache. They remembered him not for his duties, but for quiet moments of shared humanity, a gentle smile during a long night, a steady hand when someone faltered, a whispered prayer when life felt heavy. A eunuch's lifetime of service was not defined by power or recognition. It was defined by endurance. Every day, he balanced duty with pain, composure with emotion, invisibility with presence. He lived not for himself, but for the palace that shaped him. And though history rarely recorded their names, the palace could not have survived without them. Their lives were testimonies to a kind of loyalty shaped not by choice, but by circumstance, quiet, unwavering, and deeply human. Loyalty in the Egyptian palace was prized above gold, land, or lineage. Every official swore allegiance to the pharaoh. Every priest pledged devotion to the gods, and every servant vowed obedience to the household they served. But for eunuchs, loyalty was not a vow. It was an expectation carved into their very bodies. Their altered state marked them as beings supposedly free from ambition, desire, or personal legacy. This made them uniquely trusted, yet deeply vulnerable. Over time, the palace learned to wield their loyalty as a weapon, one that could stabilize order or control individuals with chilling precision. From the beginning, eunuchs were taught that loyalty was not optional. Their survival depended on it. As children in training, they learned to kneel properly, to avert their gaze in the presence of royalty, and to accept blame quietly even when they were innocent. They were not encouraged to question commands. A eunuch who hesitated, even briefly, risked punishment or reassignment. Loyalty became reflexive, woven into their habits, movements, and thoughts. But the palace did not merely demand loyalty, it exploited it. Officials and nobles often used eunuchs to accomplish tasks they themselves wished to avoid. A vizier who feared angering the queen might send a eunuch with an unfavorable message. A concubine wanting to undermine a rival might manipulate a eunuch into delivering a request at a strategic moment. Even the pharaoh sometimes relied on eunuchs to carry out decisions he preferred to remain distant from, especially when those decisions risked conflict. In these moments, eunuchs became tools for political maneuvering. Their presence as neutral, obedient servants made them ideal intermediaries. No one suspected them of having personal motives, and so their actions were interpreted as extensions of higher authority. A eunuch's simple gesture, moving a scroll, adjusting a schedule, delivering a message, could shift the balance of power without anyone recognizing the source of the influence. This lack of suspicion made their loyalty dangerous in the wrong hands. A noblewoman who wanted a rival punished could manipulate a eunuch into reporting something untrue. A jealous official might falsely accuse a eunuch of overhearing treasonous words, knowing the eunuch would be punished without question. Because eunuchs rarely defended themselves, their silence became a weapon others could wield freely. The palace also used their loyalty in more intimate ways. Eunuchs were sent to console distressed concubines, calm frightened children, and support nobles during embarrassing or emotionally charged moments. They became confidants without consent, absorbing secrets they could not share, offering stability without receiving comfort. Those they served came to rely on them deeply, sometimes to the point of emotional dependency. Yet even this closeness could be used against the eunuchs. A concubine feeling betrayed by the pharaoh might lash out at the eunuch who delivered poor news. A child who grew into adulthood might forget the years of gentle care and treat the eunuch with cold distance. But the most dangerous use of their loyalty occurred during political tension. When factions in the palace competed for influence, eunuchs were often caught in the crossfire. A prince preparing for succession might pressure a eunuch to reveal something about the queen. A priest might interrogate a eunuch about the pharaoh's private behavior. Each faction assumed eunuchs would serve them unquestioningly, not realizing, or not caring, that obeying one could doom them in the eyes of another. Despite these pressures, most eunuchs remained steadfast in their loyalty to the pharaoh. They understood that their protection came from serving the throne above all else. When rivalries intensified, they walked carefully, speaking little, observing much. Some developed a quiet wisdom about palace politics, recognizing when alliances shifted, when danger grew, and when to disappear temporarily into the background. Their survival depended on discernment as much as obedience. Yet loyalty also shaped their internal lives. Eunuchs often took pride in their service, even when exploited. They found meaning in the small moments of stability they provided, guiding a child through fear, preventing a quarrel in the harem, easing the queen's worries during illness. Their loyalty was not always forced. It sometimes grew from genuine affection. A eunuch who raised a prince from infancy might feel a father-like devotion. One who tended a princess might feel protective in ways he did not express aloud. These emotions strengthened their resolve, but also made them vulnerable to heartbreak when relationships changed or ended abruptly. There were rare instances when eunuchs resisted, not openly but quietly. A eunuch might delay delivering a message he knew would spark conflict. He might position himself between two arguing concubines to diffuse tension. He might subtly steer a child away from dangerous influence. These small acts of resistance were not rebellion. They were attempts to prevent harm without violating the palace's demands. But even these were dangerous. If discovered, the eunuch risked severe punishment. Ultimately, the palace viewed eunuch loyalty as something that could be shaped, exploited, and discarded. When a eunuch became too knowledgeable, too influential, or too worn down to serve effectively, officials reassigned him or quietly replaced him. His years of loyal service were acknowledged only in silence. There was no ceremony, no tribute, no gratitude. And yet, loyalty remained the defining element of a eunuch's life. It gave them purpose, structure, and identity. It also brought them pain, risk, and erasure. Their loyalty was both their greatest value and their greatest vulnerability, a double-edged sword wielded by everyone around them. In a palace built on power, the eunuch's unwavering loyalty became the invisible force that held the world together, and the invisible blade that cut them deepest. The Egyptian palace recorded the lives of kings, queens, generals, and priests in stone and ink. Their achievements were inscribed on temple walls, carved into obelisks, and preserved on papyrus for future generations to admire. But the eunuchs, those who walked the palace halls every day, who shaped its order and stability from the shadows, left behind no monuments, no official histories. Their legacy survived not in grand inscriptions, but in the quiet, enduring ways they shaped the world around them. A legacy built not from glory, but from presence. Their influence could not be measured in battles won or conquests achieved. Instead, it lived in the moments of peace they preserved. In the harem, eunuchs prevented countless conflicts from escalating. Their calm interventions kept rivalries from erupting into violence. Their gentle guidance stabilized a world defined by jealousy, ambition, and vulnerability. Without them, the harem would have been chaos. With them, it became a realm where children could grow, concubines could rest, and queens could breathe freely. Their legacy lived in the royal children who grew into rulers. A pharaoh might remember the steady hand that helped him walk his first steps. A princess might recall the soft voice that soothed her during nightmares. These memories became part of the ruler's emotional foundation, silent influences shaping how they governed, how they trusted, and how they treated those around them. A king might never publicly acknowledge the eunuch who comforted him as a child, but that comfort echoed through every decision he made as an adult. Eunuchs also shaped palace politics in subtle but powerful ways. Their knowledge of personalities allowed them to steer dangerous situations toward calmer outcomes. An overheard argument, a tense exchange, a poorly timed message. Eunuchs acted quietly to prevent disasters before they reached royal ears. Their intuition and discretion kept the palace functioning smoothly, even when rival factions threatened to destabilize it. Their legacy, though invisible, was woven into the continuity of the royal household. They influenced culture as well. Eunuchs introduced children to songs, stories, and rituals that might otherwise have been forgotten. They taught discipline through gentle repetition rather than force. They demonstrated patience in a world where impatience caused conflict. Their behavior set examples that spread beyond the harem walls, affecting tutors, servants, and even officials who observed their calm and adopted some of their methods. Their way of managing tension through quiet presence became part of palace culture itself. Their legacy extended to the servants and workers who lived in the shadows of the palace. A eunuch who offered kindness to a frightened kitchen boy inspired that boy to show kindness in his own tasks. A eunuch who protected a timid servant girl from harsh reprimand created a ripple of compassion in a place where compassion was rare. These small acts, repeated across decades, shaped the palace's humanity in ways history would never record. They also preserved the emotional memory of the palace. Eunuchs who lived long lives became living archives, remembering the births of princes, the marriages of queens, the deaths of rulers, the scandals whispered in wine-scented rooms. They carried these memories with reverence, passing fragments of them to younger eunuchs who continued the quiet tradition. No scribe consulted them, yet they knew the palace's intimate history better than most scholars. Their memory was a legacy of silent truth. But perhaps their most significant legacy was dignity, an unspoken dignity that endured despite the harshness of their fate. Eunuchs were shaped by trauma, defined by limitation, and restricted by strict rules. Yet they walked with composure. They served without complaint. They found community among themselves. They protected those who never asked for protection, and comforted those who rarely acknowledged it. Their resilience became a quiet, enduring testimony to human endurance. Even in death, their legacy lingered. When a eunuch passed, his absence marked a shift in the palace's rhythm. A concubine noticed the silence where his gentle footsteps once echoed. A child realized that the hands that tied his sandals were gone. A queen sensed that the steady presence behind her chair had disappeared. These subtle voids were proof of the eunuch's impact. The palace moved forward, but never in quite the same way. Their legacy lived not through carved names or written stories, but through the countless lives they touched, through the peace they maintained, the children they raised, the crises they prevented, and the compassion they offered in a world that rarely returned it. In every corner of the palace where harmony existed, a eunuch had once stood, calming, guiding, listening. And though history may not remember their names, the palace's walls remembered their footsteps. The corridors remembered their quiet vigilance. The harem remembered their protection. The children remembered their care, and the legacy of their presence lived on long after their lives ended. In the grand story of ancient Egypt, its temples, pyramids, wars, and dynasties, the eunuch's legacy was not a chapter, but a foundation. Invisible, uncredited, but essential. A reminder that sometimes the most important roles in history belong to those who were never meant to be remembered, yet without whom the world would have fallen apart.